Mark's voice echoed in Michael's ears, reverberating through the still night air. Michael stared at the imposing museum, its Gothic architecture casting an ominous presence. It loomed before them, dark and silent, like a sleeping giant waiting to awaken. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows that danced on the cobblestone path. "S1, I dare you!" Mark's voice cut through the silence, challenging and unyielding. Mark taunted, his shadow stretching out like a monster's claws, adding to the sinister atmosphere. Michael hated being called chicken even more than he hated being cold. The chill in the air seemed to seep into his bones. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "S2, scared chicken?" Mark's voice was a mix of mockery and challenge. "S1, Michael shivered. Not just from the cold, but from the weight of the dare. The night air was cold, biting at his skin. He hated being cold, but he hated backing down even more. It wasn't the museum that scared him. Not entirely. Okay, maybe it was a little bit. The dark windows seemed to watch him, judging his every move, but mostly it was the dare, the challenge that gnawed at his pride.
"No, I'm not scared of some dumb old museum." Michael's voice tried to sound confident, but there was a slight tremor.
He hoped his voice didn't shake too much, betraying his true feelings. He started toward the museum steps, each one feeling heavier than the last. The night seemed to grow colder, the shadows darker as he approached the entrance. The dare was simple, but the fear it invoked was complex, a mix of pride, terror, and the unknown. The heavy oak door creaked open, sounding like a death groan. The sound reverberated through the empty halls, sending shivers down Michael's spine. Michael stepped inside, the musty smell of old things filling his nostrils. The air was thick with the scent of decay and history, as if the past was still lingering in the corners. He wished he hadn't taken the dare. The idea of spending a night in the haunted museum had seemed thrilling at first, but now, surrounded by darkness and silence, he felt a deep sense of regret.
"See, not so scary." Mark's voice was confident, almost mocking as he tried to reassure Michael.
Mark whispered, pushing past him. His breath was warm against Michael's ear, but it did little to comfort him. His voice echoed in the vast empty hall. The sound seemed to stretch on forever, bouncing off the walls and fading into the distance. Michael wished Mark would be quiet. Every noise seemed amplified in the eerie silence, making his anxiety grow with each passing second. He didn't like the way their voices bounced off the walls. It was as if the museum itself was alive, listening to their every word. The only light came from a dim bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. It flickered occasionally, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. It swayed slightly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, creating eerie shapes that played tricks on Michael's mind. Michael imagined the shadows were alive, reaching out for them. He could almost feel their cold, ghostly fingers brushing against his skin. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the darkness. Michael jumped, his heart racing. The sound was sudden and unexpected, breaking the heavy silence. His heart pounded in his chest. Each beat was loud and fast, echoing in his ears like a drum. He wished he hadn't eaten that chili earlier. The spicy meal churned in his stomach, adding to his discomfort and fear. The night was far from over, and Michael could only hope he would make it through without losing his nerve. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the smell of dust and decay. Michael hated that smell. It reminded him of his grandmother's attic. He hated that attic too.
"This place gives me the creeps,"
Michael whispered, his breath catching in his throat. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans.
"Come on, scaredy cat. The good stuff is this way."
Mark teased. Already halfway down the hall, he pointed to a sign that read, "Egyptian Exhibit." Michael hesitated. He didn't like the look of the exhibit. It was too dark, too quiet, too dead. But he couldn't let Mark call him a scaredy cat. As they entered the exhibit, a figure emerged from the shadows. Michael jumped back, bumping into Mark. They both gasped. It was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He wore a dark suit that hung loosely on his frail frame. His eyes, though, were sharp and bright, like a hawk's.
"What are you boys doing here? This area's off limits."
"We were just looking. We didn't know."
The old man stared at them for a moment, his gaze unwavering.
"Well, be careful," the old man finally said, his voice still a raspy whisper. "Some things in this museum don't like to be disturbed." He turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Suddenly, the single light bulb flickered and died, plunging the exhibit into darkness. Michael felt a scream rising in his throat. He swallowed it down. Then he heard it, a whisper, coming from the darkness, right next to his ear. Narrator. Michael shivered. He didn't like the way the old man said that. It was as if he knew something they didn't, something bad. "Get out while you still can," the whisper hissed, sending chills down Michael's spine. Michael spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs, the echo of the whisper still ringing in his ears. But there was no one there. The corridor was empty, filled only with the eerie silence of the museum. "Did you hear that?" Michael whispered, his voice trembling, barely able to contain his fear. He felt a cold sweat forming on his forehead.
Mark just laughed, a nervous sound that echoed awkwardly in the vast, dimly lit space. He tried to brush it off. He was trying to be brave, to show Michael that there was nothing to be afraid of. But even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease.
Michael's eyes darted around the room, trying to adjust to the darkness. Shadows seemed to move and shift, playing tricks on his mind. That's when he saw it, a pair of eyes glowing in the dark, staring at him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. A pair of eyes glowing in the dark. They were watching him, unblinking, as if they could see right through him. He stumbled back, bumping into a display case, the sound of glass rattling, breaking the silence. His breath quickened. The eyes followed him, their gaze unwavering, tracking his every move. It was as if they were alive. They were the eyes of the queen in the painting. Her gaze was piercing, almost accusing, as if she knew something he didn't. The queen in the painting was watching him. Her eyes seemed to hold a sinister secret, one that Michael was desperate to uncover, but terrified to face. He took a hesitant step closer, his curiosity battling with his fear. What was it about this painting that felt so alive? Michael's face was a mix of fear and determination. He had to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Mark stood back, watching Michael with concern. He didn't understand why his friend was so drawn to the painting, but he could see the fear in his eyes. Michael reached out, his hand trembling as it moved closer to the painting. The air around him felt charged, almost electric. His hand was just inches away from the painting now. He could feel a strange energy emanating from it, pulling him in. As his fingers brushed the surface, a sudden flash of light blinded him, and he felt a jolt of energy surge through his body. Michael recoiled in shock, stumbling back. The room seemed to spin, and for a moment he thought he heard the whisper again, more urgent this time. Mark rushed to his side, worry etched on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the painting. He felt a newfound understanding, a connection to the Queen that he couldn't explain. The painting of the Queen, her eyes still glowing eerily, seemed to hold a promise, a secret that Michael was now determined to uncover. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The eyes in the painting seemed to burn into him, filled with ancient rage. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Dust rained down from the ceiling. A low, rumbling sound filled the air, growing louder by the second.
"We need to get out of here," Mark shouted, his voice high with panic.
But it was too late. The floor cracked open, and sand began to pour in, quickly filling the room. Michael and Mark scrambled back, but there was nowhere to go. They were trapped.
"This way!"
Mark yelled, grabbing Michael's arm and dragging him towards a narrow doorway. They squeezed through just as the sand reached the ceiling. They found themselves in a dark, narrow passageway. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Michael coughed, his eyes stinging. "I can't see!"
Mark fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a lighter. The flame sputtered to life.
Suddenly they heard a noise behind them, a low growl, deep and menacing. The chase was on. They ran through endless corridors, the flickering lighter their only guide. The growling grew louder, closer. They were running out of time. Finally, they burst into a large chamber. In the center of the room stood a massive sarcophagus, its lid slightly ajar. A green, ethereal glow emanated from within. The growling stopped. Michael and Mark stood frozen in fear, their breath catching in their throats. Slowly, the lid of the sarcophagus began to creak open. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the horror he knew he was about to face. He waited for the scream to rip from his throat, but it never came. He opened one eye, then the other. The sarcophagus stood open. It was empty. Relief washed over Michael. It was over. They were safe. He turned to tell Mark, but Mark was gone. "Mark!" Michael called out, his voice echoing in the chamber. Silence. He was completely alone. Then he heard it again. The whisper. This time it wasn't a warning, it was a threat. "You are mine now!" the voice hissed, slithering around him like a serpent. Michael spun around, searching for the source of the voice. But there was nothing there. He was surrounded by shadows. The lighter flickered in his trembling hand, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He was trapped. As he backed away, the shadows seemed to reach out for him, their touch cold and menacing. He tripped and fell, the lighter flying from his grasp. Darkness engulfed him. And then he heard it. Mark's terrified scream. The haunting truth hit him. He wasn't alone. He was never going to be alone again.